90% of the jobs today start out as Zoom interviews. Because when you get 100 resumes like we did, how do you go through them? You can't interview that many people in person. So that was the tool we used to separate the first group. If you can't get past Zoom interview, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So that's become probably, the resume is important because as you grade people on their experience versus what your criteria are, that gets you into the Zoom interview. Then the Zoom interview is going to get you the in-person interview. So the Zoom interview is key to getting the interview, because if you don't get the interview, you can't get the job.
Welcome to Leadership on the Links, the podcast that showcases innovators in golf course management and the issues they face. I'm your host, Tyler Bloom. In Leadership on the Links, you hear the stories of people shaping the industry from their first swing to their dream match. You feel like you're on the course playing with your most inspiring colleagues, having great conversations, digging into insights and sharing a few laughs. Our industry is changing. As a leader, you need to keep up on everything from trends to technology to best practices. Together, we'll continue to build world-class clubs and teams. Let's get to it. Enjoy.
So one of the fun things about being in this world of consulting now is you get to interact with people that you may have heard of, you may have read about, and things of that nature. And I've got one of those industry icons that I've read about for a long time that we've hit it off in a couple different conversations in our travels, whether it's at the GCSA conference. I remember being in Texas at one point on a phone call with you about a certain topic. And then obviously a little bit about grass itself. We still talk about grass periodically, Zoysia specifically. And I'm super pumped today to be joined by our guest, Ken, and feel free to kind of introduce yourself and a little bit of your career, man. If you could summarize a pretty accomplished career.
Well, I've been very fortunate, really. We moved to a golf course when I was 16 and from a farm. So I went right to work on the golf course. So it was an easy transition. But I learned also that I didn't know as much as I needed to. So I went to Lake City to school, and that's back when Dr. Nutter assigned your OJT sites. And I got assigned to Palmer Maples Jr., who was the vice president of GCSAA. And you talk about a lifelong friend. I'll get to say some things, introduce him at our prayer breakfast at GCSAA this year. He's coming back. He's the oldest living president of GCSAA. So I got to work with him, which was very instrumental in my career. Then I went to work as an assistant in Atlanta at Mystery Valley. Then I moved to Lagoon Park in Montgomery, Alabama, which was maybe one of the best jobs I ever had. It was a city-owned property, the pride of the city. There was 2 people between me and the mayor. And if I needed a dump truck and 12 people, all I had to do was call the mayor. And it's probably one of the best jobs with the most freedom that I've ever had. And I didn't make a lot of money, but it was a great stepping stone. And then I went to Idle Hour over in Macon, which was a private club that had a lot of history. It had dead greens. So it was one of those you could make an instant improvement. I put in bent grass there, which was at the time pretty controversial. You'd have friends call you and say, "Is it dead yet?" But it was one of those situations where they had lost Bermuda grass 2 years in a row. So what's the worst thing that could happen? But the bent grass is still there today, thanks to William Shirley and Wade Thomas. But we had a tournament called the Peach Blossom, and we had a lot of players from around the Southeast played in, a lot of college players, a lot of people who went on. Andy Bean played in it when he was young. Peter Persons, a lot of good players. And we usually had about a dozen teams from the athletic club that played. And I can remember they were having some issues there, and these members were grousing about it. And I told my assistant one day, "I sure would like to meet a happy athletic club member." And then after I got the job, I said that a few more times. But having bent grass there really got their attention, how good it was. So that really gave me the opportunity to go to the athletic club. And that was just a fabulous place. Very progressive. They were willing to do things first, as Zoysia fairways, ultra dwarf greens, having the championships. I had a great GM I worked 25 years with, a professional 27 years. We had a great team. And when they came and interviewed me, they said, we're trying to put together a 25-year team. And that really got my attention. And we did it. So that was a great place. And then I decided I guess this was probably been around 2010 or so, that I would retire at 62 for several reasons. So I opened up a LLC then in the consulting business and had that ready to go when I retired at 62. So it's been almost 11 years, but it's maybe some of the best 11 years I've ever had.
A couple questions I have for you. So at a club like Atlanta Athletic Club, and I hear this a lot from search committees and again, questions periodically from superintendents. How did you navigate at a club with national championships and constant scrutiny? How did you navigate on what really mattered and what was your focus points versus just noise? Because I imagine that there is a lot of that sort of, opinions, perspectives, things of that nature. But like, how did you stay focused and kept the main thing the main thing?
It kind of goes back to one of the things in our interview. They asked me about tournament preparation. Did I get excited? Did I get the golf course in great shape for tournaments? And I said, well, not really, because if I maintain the golf course properly, we shouldn't have to do a lot for a tournament. Maybe change the times we do things. So I think focusing on making it great daily, having a set of standards. I'm a big guy on, I want to build a budget on standards and getting them to agree to standards. So as long as you can do that, I think that, yeah, you'll always have some noise. And then you ask the guy what his score was and you find out it wasn't so good.
I have found it's so interesting when we talk about maintenance standards. And I think there's a lot of variable opinions on maintenance standards. But a lot of times when we work with different clubs, I find that those that aren't really having a whole lot of issues have maintenance standards. And those that have maybe some question marks don't really have unified standards.
Well, it's hard for somebody if they see I need 40 people. If they don't see that 6 of those guys are mowing greens, 10 of those guys are hand raking bunkers, 6 of those guys are mowing fairways, you have to help people see what these people actually do. And that's where the standards come in. It's because you set the mowing schedule, which there's nothing more important in the maintenance of a golf course than a rigid mowing schedule every week. If you do that, if you just do that one thing, the one thing, if you do that one thing every week, you're going to have a good looking golf course. And helping people understand how many people and how much equipment and how much time, time is a thing that a lot of people forget about. To do those standards, you'll have a great golf course.
You also had to navigate, I assume, a lot of different relationships through your time there, whether general manager, director of golf, club members. Talk a little bit about that and maybe the evolution for you as a leader, in managing those different constituent relationships.
Well, I think that's one place where playing golf helps. We'll come back to that later, but you got to get to know people, know how they do business. We found that if I had a chairman who owned his own business and ran his own business, he's going to be involved a little more in the daily routines. If I had a CEO, I remember one chairman he was always quick to the point. What's going on? What's the problem? What do you recommend? Okay, let's do it. Everybody's a little different. So you have to do some investigation on how that person wants to communicate. Is it email? Is it text? Is it phone calls? Is it meetings? And how they do business. I think that's probably one of the best things you can do because you do get different people to work with. Our constant was the GM and the golf professional. And we were a tight team and we were still great friends. And that's one of the best things the club ever had was that nucleus of people. But so our job was in some ways to kind of keep the ship going straight as we got different committees and different people. One time I had the highest handicap on our green committee. So they wanted 2-inch rough. Well, we gave it to them. Obviously the members didn't like that very much, but that's just an example of what can happen when you change people on committees.
Did you do any sort of, and I'm starting to see this more and more, and really good clubs are doing this. It doesn't matter if it's an elite level club or it's your average day to day private club or facility. They're trying to do a better job of actually onboarding and set proper governance, even at the green committee level, so that there's shared knowledge, shared experiences, and trying to get people more educated as they come onto the committee. And then there's a transfer of that information as they may take on a green chair role or a more active role within the club. Did you guys do any of that?
Yeah, we tried to do some education for people when they came onto the committee. And the committee was a place that we actually graded people and then recommended them to go to other committees, then to the board. So we were very involved in trying to, well, you need good leadership. You really do. So we basically act as a screen for people to go to other committees, then to the board, because nobody ever came onto the board that had never been on a committee.
Yeah. I love that. Hope many people are listening to what you just said there is nobody gets on the board without being on a committee. It's a lot of clubs that could benefit from that. What changed the most in your time as a director, not just at Atlanta Athletic Club, but what you've seen in the industry? What has changed the most, and maybe what hasn't changed at all?
Well, that's a tough question. I think the standards we operate under have probably continued to get higher. Green speeds. People want higher green speeds than they probably need, but that's just one of the things that continues to grow. I think staffing is more difficult now. I was very fortunate to go through a time where I had a great staff of people. One of my favorite pictures is, it's not the one behind me, the one on my wall over here, that all the guys that work with me during the PGA, all the assistants and superintendents that came back, is all signed by all the people. I don't know that would happen today, as much turnover and as difficult it is to find good hourly people.
But that also though, I think is a reflection though of your leadership to maintain and protect that culture, to have that. What were some of your values or processes, practices to try to retain, develop, recruit people?
Well, you got to take care of people. You think about, these guys are typically the entry-level workforce. We're tasked with creating world-class conditions with the entry-level workforce. So you can't pay them. There's only so much you can pay them, but you can show appreciation. I like to know about their family. I want to know them personally. One of the things we did, Airification Day, I'd go get a big thing of watermelons, ice them down, so when everybody finished a long day, a little thing like that. We always had a Christmas party where everybody participated and helped cook and brought desserts, and I would collect hats and shirts and gift cards and stuff all year, and then we'd have a raffle at the Christmas party for that. We'd have cookouts a couple of times a year. I think that goes a long way with just showing people you care and stopping and talking to them. When you ride the golf course, don't ride by and not pay them attention. I think, because when they know you care, it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
I had some great guys. I still talk to a lot of them.
We're developing a presentation for the upcoming GCSA conference, and it's all about trends with the workforce and different things to expect, whether it's compensation, whether it's career development and training, recruiting. And one of the comments that was made internally from one of my team members, Mitch, who does a ton of our interview, pretty much predominantly most of our initial phase interviews. And I had asked him, I said, what's the biggest problem that you see? And he's got a very objective perspective. He doesn't have 30, 40 years of industry. He's got 5 years of industry perspective and interviewing hundreds of people. And he said, I think the biggest thing I find is that the superintendent needs to be the biggest advocate for themselves and for their team when it comes to building a great work team culture. You've got to be the biggest advocate for them. Nobody else is going to do that.
Well, yeah, you think about how complicated insurance and benefits and all that is. You got to help them with all that. One of the things that I found too was we never had to advertise for jobs. All we would say is we need one person, we need 2 people. And my guys would bring people in because they like working there, and they would make sure they brought good people. So if you can create that culture, you never have problems with finding people.
We say this, and I echo this everywhere I go, is the number one recruiting tool is a happy employee. Because they're going to do all the work for you, like you just said. And referrals are the best form of recruiting because somebody knows, likes, and trusts you. And they're trusting that you're putting them in a position that they're going to be successful, they're going to be fulfilled financially, personally, spiritually, whatever the case may be. And that's something that I really think gets lost a lot of times because we get questions, and you probably do too, and in your travels about, compensation and pay. And it's important. It really is. You gotta be competitive to your local market, whether that's a McDonald's, whether that's another club, hospitality, whatever it is. You got to be competitive in that market, but there's a lot of little things. And I know so many clubs that don't pay, in the 75th or 90th percentile of wages, but they do a lot of the other small little things like that you just described. So I thought that was great to hear that.
Well, and another thing you've got to do, we made sure that our guys got 40 hours every week, wintertime, whatever. They've got to count on that. You can't cut their work time back to 18 hours because it's cold, because they've got bills too. So now, if it was a rainy day and they chose to go home, they could. But we always had equipment to wash. We built our equipment building. We had heat, we had water, we had air. We could wax, polish, whatever we wanted to do on equipment. We always produced firewood for the members, which we they could always split wood, and then we'd sell it to the members, and they could make a donation to the tree fund to replace the trees we just cut down. But we always had work for them to do, and I think that's another key thing in is making sure they got a steady income. You can't tell them, well, you should have saved money. You should save your money from overtime in the summer.
Oh man. That's a story that I would love to expand upon, but I want to move from that because man, you're 100% right. I appreciate that. I forget who I was talking to recently about this, and they're dealing with seasonal staff, and we talked quite a bit about. Have you considered, their challenge is that like they have such a growing season, they really only have maybe 3 to 4 months of employment for people, and so they're in this like rat race and this hamster wheel of constantly churning and burning people. And I said, what are your thoughts about having less staff, but keeping them on more round, like year round, so they don't leave you, and making sure that they're guaranteed 30 to 40 hours a week versus you're cutting people off, and then you're spending your months of March and April hopefully being able to get that staff numbers back up. You have a set expectation every single week on what needs to be done. Why don't you consider trying to retain some of the people more on a full-time basis, which I understand there's benefits and other things that go into that, but why don't you try to retain them so you get off the season on the right foot, and maybe you consider hiring more part-time people? Because I've seen that shift as well, where we see a lot more staffs where it's part-time employees so they can get a lot of things done in the morning, and people are happy. They're only going to have to be there 4 or 5 hours. Maybe it's rotational days. Yes, you still have your core staff that does the bread and butter of things, but you have a much more flexible operation because you have more bodies. Do you see that?
Well, yeah. Ideally, if you could find people just to work in the morning,
Yeah.
but that not everybody can afford to work just the morning. But we did have 3 or 4 guys that worked just mornings for us. They were great. Older retired people. We had one guy took care of our par 3 course. He'd mow greens and do setup and then go to his next job. So yes, you can find part time. We had firemen that worked for us on their days off. So, but I think you're right on having people year round, taking care of them. You're just better off.
Yeah. We did a study last year of working Americans, and not necessarily specific to golf, right? Just general working Americans, and why would they or wouldn't they consider a career in golf? And the 2 or 3 things that like stood out to me, which listen, are gonna come as no surprise to anybody listening to this. One was awareness. They just weren't aware. They just weren't aware that a lot of these opportunities existed, right? So that's one thing. They didn't know where their local golf course was. They didn't know how much they pay. And as they would describe a career in golf, it would be more seasonal based. So it detracts them because their understanding of whatever it is it's more of a seasonal type job. So I think being able to create more of those full-time opportunities is critical. When we talked about this, and hit on it about the importance of being visible, being out there playing golf. And I want to jump into this a little bit around the value for a superintendent to play golf and how that may change their perspective day to day in their current operation. But I would say also on the, job search front, which we're very active in, how much I hear committees talk about that as an important criteria.
Well, I just finished helping a club fill a position, do a search. Out of 101 resumes, how many people do you think listed their handicap?
Less than 5%.
3. But this is a players club. So I highly recommend people put their handicap on there. And if you don't have a handicap, establish one, because this committee went through the state handicap thing to look and see if they could find people. So, and it's not that you got to be a single digit. It's just that you know the game, and I think if you're going to be a golfer, you need a handicap. And when it gets into, there's so many things that golf gets you into. One, you get to see the golf course that you might not normally see. You get in their world, so to speak, because a lot of them do business on the golf course. Being comfortable in their world, I think that's one of the things that people overlook. Is just, it's a good way to get to know people and be in their zone, so to speak. Playing with different groups. You can't just play with one group. You got to spread it around. And I think when people get to know you and understand where you're coming from, all of a sudden you create a friend rather than somebody that just talks about you. He's really concerned about this. So I think when they see the drive you have, it's really important. When I think about my career, I've got a couple of stories I'll tell you that kind of emphasize this. When I was at Idle Hour, I had one member, Marion Gilbert, who complained about the bunker sand constantly. And I played with their group quite a bit. So one day we're playing, and Idle Hour has small greens. It's not unusual to miss a lot of greens. So on the front nine, I got up and down 6 times out of the bunkers. We got on the 10th tee, and Mr. Gilbert walks up and looks at me and says, "It's not the sand, is it?" So I never heard another word about the bunker sand after that. So, but if I didn't play, that he would still been complaining about the bunker sand. Then when I went to the athletic club, I replaced a guy who didn't play. Okay. And you could tell that by the way the golf course was cut. The fairways were cut counterclockwise. So the grain went this way. If you hit it down the right side, the ball would roll a long way. The left side, it would be into the grain. And the grass would stand up 6 inches high when you stood it up. So it may look okay, but it plays terrible. When people burn in stripes, it lays the grass over rather than the grass standing up. So I can usually tell if a guy plays golf by how he mows the golf course. But my second day at the athletic club, 2 board members asked me to play golf with them and their guests. And I'm going, it's my second day of work. I said, "I'll tell you what, I'll play the back 9. So I meet them on the 10th tee, and they said, "We're playing a $5 2-down automatic." I said, "Okay, whatever." Now this is 1988. It's $5 back then was a little more. So I shoot 32. My partner shoots 33. We beat them 7-5, 3-1 and 1. And I'm kind of feeling good. And then I realized somebody's got to pay me. And I'm hoping the guest will pay me. But the board member, Mr. O'Callahan, came over, gave me the money, and said, "Don't think I'll ever forget this." Well, he goes on to be president. He gives me my first 5-year contract. But after that, the word spread. I played. I got all kinds of calls to play with people. There was a different level of respect people had, and you couldn't buy that. That may have been one of the best things I ever did there. Then when the board took board trips, we'd go to Shinnecock, Atlantic, Maidstone, and National Golf Links. I got to go because I played. I got to go play Augusta because I play. The things they include you in because you play are really important.
I love that story because that really plays into something I've been talking with superintendents about. And it's not in a way that somebody should be seeking this out, but like if you're looking to have more influence, you want insider knowledge of what's going on at your club. This is a way to develop that rapport, to get the insider knowledge, so you're not hearing things second, third hand. Oftentimes you'll be consulted on for your advice by having an inside track to your club. So this is almost like a secondary benefit of playing golf, is actually having that access.
Well, one of the best things you can do, if you've got somebody complaining, go play with them. I had a guy complain about the way the greens rolled, and I make putts, and he doesn't because he's he's bouncing the ball, but it's hard for him to complain when I make putts. So I think if you got somebody that's has an issue or complaining, go play with them, get to know them a little bit.
Yeah. I wrote an article about this not too long ago, and I think it was probably in Boardroom Magazine about this specific context on the importance of playing golf. And there's a couple different lenses of how I see it. What we're talking about here, absolutely, like fully the reasons why you should be playing golf. But what I find in the search context at times, too early, the committees will dismiss somebody because they don't play golf or play golf at a high level. And I say, well, you got to be careful because there's another extreme of that. The other extreme is that you have somebody that's playing golf too much, and there's a balance there of using,
absolutely,
a balance there of leveraging the work site for fun and entertainment and leveraging the work site for improving your position, improving your perspective in the job that you do. And so a lot of times I have to coach the employer hiring committee. I'm not saying you shouldn't put weight in that. That's not what I'm saying. But there are many cases where somebody that's really good and has understanding of playability may not have the entire know-how to deliver on that playability. Now, that's not saying that that's the case in every circumstance, but I think you have to be careful to not overweigh that either. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, you can play too much. You shouldn't be on the tee sheet on Saturday morning, and you shouldn't play with the same group over and over, and you shouldn't play for a lot of money.
Well, I love playing Thursday night men's league and taking the money of my green chair and golf chair. So if they're listening to this, they're laughing as I say that.
But yeah, I mean, there's certainly guys who do a great job that don't play golf. I'm not saying you can't do that. I just think you get more respect by playing, and what you say carries more weight. And I think they appreciate the fact that you see the golf course from their perspective.
Yeah. 100%. Same language, shared language is hard because a lot of times I find superintendents expect their members and their club officials to speak the language of a superintendent. It never works out that way. You got to find a way to adapt to them.
Yeah, you have to put things in a way that they can understand. The thing I use about bunkers, bunkers, you probably never had any complaints about bunkers, but I always use the analogy of, tell me what happens to the sand when you're at the beach and you're in the water and you walk back to the condo. Well, it gets drier. So when they think about these bunker faces, that's just one thing that they okay, yeah, I get it now. It dries out in the face, so it's hard the ball's going to plug more in the face than it is the bottom.
Yeah. Switching gears just slightly. So, 11 years post being a superintendent, what has surprised you? What has surprised you now of what you see in your travels that maybe you didn't have the perspective when you were in it?
Think about that one a minute. I think right now we see a lot of high-end developments. Most of the places I'm working with there's a lot of billionaire owners and bigger developments. And you may have seen the one on Facebook, Mike Kaiser, the things he's doing with Dream Golf. I'm working with him on both of those, and there's just a lot. There's a boom going, and Omakaya is a beautiful piece of property they're building. So I think the fact that there's so many very nice, well-built properties going in is one of the things I see. Don't see as many people getting into the business. We went through that lull where 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, where a lot of schools cut the programs out. Lake City, where I went, cut their program out. And I don't think we've got as many good young people coming in as we had at one point.
Man, we're gonna chase a rabbit hole here on this a little bit. I have some very, very deep thoughts on this and perspectives. So it feels like that component of getting people back in the industry, there has been a variety of different approaches on it. One of which is the narrative around work-life balance and the importance of that to attract people. And now kind of that was a very big theme. And certainly I will put my hand up and say, I think it's important that we find ways to integrate opportunities throughout the year, specifically for assistant superintendents, equipment managers, and superintendents, that they've got to find a way to recharge the battery and try to get that in. But the job's not changing. I mean, these high-level resorts destination places have extreme expectations. And that's now trickling down to what we see working with clubs is that these members are traveling to these clubs, seeing these new builds, new designs, and seeing expectations growing. And so it's like kind of counterintuitive. Like, how do you have more work-life balance when the expectations are climbing? That's a separate topic in of itself. But from getting people into the industry, I almost wonder if we've done ourselves a disservice to some degree by not telling people really that this is a demanding job and there are periods where it's going to be a grind. Not to say that that's 12 months out of the year, but there are periods of when that happens. And just kind of your thoughts on how you manage that and how you see superintendents managing that like specific component.
Well, one of the things we did was I had a superintendent, first and second assistant on each golf course, so they could have 2 weekends off, work a weekend. That was one thing that really seemed to help spread the load. Changing to an ultra dwarf greens, you talk about a change in lifestyle. That for people who manage bent grass, that was one of the biggest things. And I don't think any of my guys would ever go back to bent grass, regardless of where it is and the pay or anything.
Yeah, I
Because
agree.
once you've experienced going home at 3 o'clock every day in July and August, you don't want to go back to pulling the hose.
That's
So I think that's been one of the biggest positive thing for people because, today's people probably, the young people today probably aren't going to work as much as I did or you did. They want more work-life balance. And how do we get that? Because we were open 63 days a year. That's a hard part of the business. And I still have trouble planning things for holidays, Memorial Day, 4th of July, and Labor Day, because I always work. Never got into the routine of going to the lake or going somewhere on those holidays. After all this time, it just doesn't resonate with me like it probably should.
Yeah, I'm the same way, and it's not a flag that I'm waving to say, yeah, look at me, look at me. But I what you just described is something I still I'm challenged with uh trying to manage my own expectations, and I'm not growing grass for a living anymore. But so I think that there's some work to do on that, on how we keep people fresh, keep people have perspective, but also understand that there's a commitment here, and depending on what level of club you see yourself at, that demand and expectation isn't gonna. I just don't see it getting easier. So it's a really interesting topic. And then on moving from that on the recruiting side, we talked about employee referrals before, but I think one thing that I think is exciting about where the industry is at right now, whether that you give that credit to the GCSAA, chapters, small groups, consultancy groups, it's a mixture, or even individual facilities. I think that there's more opportunities now for individuals to get engaged into the industry, get educated. That doesn't require a 2-year, 4-year degree. There's other companies and programs, whether it's Excel, whether it's Green Start Academy, Syngenta Business Institute. There's all of these great programs and platforms out there now to get people educated and provide them access to maybe things that they didn't have before. I think that's one really great way to get people talking about the industry is by engaging them in a lot of these different programs. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that there's certainly more opportunities online that we didn't have. And one of the things I think is good about some of these new developments is they're going into more rural areas where people have some farm background. I came from from the farm to the golf course was perfect. When I look now around the athletic club, there's no farms anywhere around. So you're not going to get people with that background. But when you look at where the Old Shores is, it's in the middle of a farming area in a rural area. So maybe there's some young people that go to work on the golf course and go, boy, I like this. This is fun. So maybe the fact that we are doing these new developments further out where land is obviously cheaper, we'll get some more young people in the business that way. And then the other thing we saw, some of the kids because I had a lot of families work for me, two brothers and their sons, and some of them you could get them into school and into taking some of these online courses.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I mean, I'm a big believer, proponent of develop from within. Certainly, there are times when you may have a gap in experience, but I think that's very short-lived. I mean, that experience gap might be a season, maybe 2 seasons. So I'm a big proponent of developing from within. You had mentioned just kind of talking about the grass standpoint, and there's a specific grass I think you're very passionate about, and I've had the good fortune to see very up close and personal on a couple different properties, but some of these new zoysia grasses, and want to hear a little bit of your thoughts on that and what you're seeing out in the field on zoysia.
Well, when I look back on my career, probably one of the best decisions I ever made was recommending we plant Xeon Zoysia in our renovation in 2002 and 3. And I'll never forget sitting there in a meeting with the board, and I made the recommendation, and one member said, well, I'd really like to stay with Bermuda grass. And I just looked at him and I said, well, we can do that, and we guarantee ourselves to be as good as everybody else, knowing that that wasn't what they wanted. And he looked at me kind of funny. I said, surely you don't expect to do the same thing and be better. So that's how we got the Xeon. That same thing applies today, because these clubs that these millionaires are building, they want the very best. And Zoysia has several characteristics. One of them that I start out with is, why do we put grass on the golf course? To play. So you want the very best playing surface, and nothing in the warm season grasses holds the ball up like Zoysia. Then from the environmental side, you can probably cut fertility 70% of what you use on Bermuda grass, and cut mowing about 50% if you fertilize properly. So environmentally, it's good. Playing experience is great. So it's kind of a win-win for everybody. So I started helping people make grassing decisions several years ago after we did ours. Then, we just had the PGA in 2001. Well, we were playing 90% of our guest rounds on the PGA course. After we did on the Highlands course, after we did the renovation on Riverside, our guest play on Highlands dropped to 40% and went to 60% on Riverside. And we got the PGA coming back in 2011 to our second best golf course. So we had to renovate our own golf course to put it back above the member course. And then Peachtree, Capital City, they just started following. Everybody had to meet that new standard.
I was blown away when I went to Mayaca, and I saw comparison by comparison to all your typical warm season turf grasses, and I was blown away at how tight it could get and how upright it was. And then obviously you dig in, and the root system was like, it was tough. It was tough to cut a knife through there, and just blown away with the quality. And then obviously seeing that project progress, was there a few months ago, and not surprised, just continued blown away with the capabilities of that grass, and from a design standpoint, probably a lot more flexibility in many instances. And then even saw that, I'm trying to think, I was at the Vaquero Club maybe about a year ago, and saw how they had it on their bunker faces. And my immediate thought was, wow, they just trimmed their weekly maintenance programs on bunker edges, by you do that maybe once or twice a year, and that's it.
Yeah, we've got zoysia grasses you can put on the bunker faces and probably not mow, maybe once or twice a year. We all know there's nothing worse than 10 guys in fly mows. You start out on the Bermuda grass, you mow it, it grows, you mow it, it grows, you mow it, it grows. But by the time the season, you got 6-inch Bermuda grass and the ball's hanging on the face and everything. Yet those zoysia grasses are revolutionary for bunkers, and you don't get the constant edging either. So you keep the bunker shapes better.
Do you see, so from a playability perspective, what do you see what do you see the members saying, golfers saying, comparative contrast from some of these zoysias?
Well, a lot of times you'll hear people ask, well, what about the divots? But the divots recover quicker because they grow from underneath, and the divot is probably a third the size of a Bermuda grass divot. And the ball sits up. Really, we call it the toothbrush effect. If you mow it properly, you get the toothbrush effect, the ball sitting on it. The other thing, the leaves come off the rhizomes at 90 degrees instead of coming off stolons in the 60, 70 degree range. So you don't have the grain to deal with, because we always hear about the Johnny Miller, the grain, I call it.
Yes. I love that. That's really funny. I haven't heard that in a while, the Johnny Miller reference. I'm not that old, or I'm not that young, too young to not know what that means. So I appreciate that. Many of my friends now coming up in the industry probably have no idea who Johnny Miller is.
Yeah, that's what we used to call it, the Johnny Miller, because he talked about grain all the time.
How do you see people implementing that, Zoysia? Like, what's like the first steps if I'm at a Bermuda course or, just starting to think about grass selection in general? Like, what are some of the things they need to be thinking about as they explore this Zoysia?
What happens is you're doing a renovation and you've got Bermuda grass. How much of it can you kill? If 95, 98, let's say you've got 100 acres and you killed 98%. Still a lot of Bermuda grass left out there. So if you plant another Bermuda grass back, what happens? The old Bermuda comes back and you've got.
Yeah.
So that's where the Zoysia really comes in, because you can control the Bermuda grass now with the new product with Syngenta, the Revolution and the Fusilade combination. You can keep the Bermuda out of the Zoysia grass. So that's a big thing. But typically people want a great playing surface. They want lower ongoing maintenance cost, and sometimes they want contrast between the maybe a Bermuda rough and Zoysia fairway. Or they want to be able to putt off the and the collars and approaches. So you can use the prism or laser that you can cut at green time if you want to.
Yeah, again very impressed. If anybody is exploring these Zoysias and needs to go take a look at them, because they're impressive. And certainly from a water management perspective, I think you would see, I would imagine, some firmer conditions, square foot by square foot, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, because you try to keep it as dry as you can, as lean as you can. The mistakes I see are people getting away from Bermuda grass management, because it's very different. It's in our nature to manage. Well, Zoysia does really good. It's you just water it when it wilts and get your color from minors, not from nitrogen.
We started all in this piece on we started exploring with Xeon Zoysia in the Mid-Atlantic. I started using it on T-tops. We had these small tees, and they were so concentrated that that cool season turf never could hold up, no matter what we did. We did Bermuda, a lot of the newer varieties of Tahoma and Latitude, and we use that in a lot of our par threes for divot recovery. But we started using the Zoysia on smaller tees where there would be high concentrated traffic. And it would be like, shoot, I don't need to mow these things maybe once a week, if that. And outside of making sure they just didn't get too dry, so they couldn't recover. I mean, outside of that, they were bulletproof. And I thought the color of them looked great. So I was a big proponent of exploring different grasses, even in, as far north as Baltimore. We
had two par threes, number 15 and 17, on the Highlands course that were very close together, close to the same length. And we had a lot of shade on the 15th hole, so we put Xeon there. And it didn't matter what day of the week, what month of the year you went out there, you always saw less divots on the Zoysia than you did on the Bermuda. So that's one of the things that I noticed right off the bat.
Yeah, I've kept you here for almost an hour, so I wanted to give you some time. Is there anything that we didn't touch on, or any parting shots that you may have?
One of the things that we talk about Zoom interviews and then interviews in general, a couple of things I picked up from this last experience. When somebody asks you, why do you want this job? Have a good answer. Be ready to answer that question. That's one of the questions is coming. So prepare for that. Don't look up at the ceiling and, my family lives close. You got to be there, because we saw people blow that answer several times. So that's just one thing to pay attention to, and make sure if you've got an interview coming up, practice and make sure you answer the hard questions and your answer going in.
So for those that are listening, and you heard Ken talk earlier about helping facilitate a recent superintendent search. So we were, I don't know, commiserating or something, or comparing notes from some of the searches that we do. We got on the topic of Zoom interviews. And so if you are somebody who is actively in the hunt for a job, or you may find yourself in a job search here in the not too distant future, I would say you better be prepared to get on a Zoom interview. And most people, in my experience, are not prepared for Zooms at all. It is their first interaction with it. A lot of times people are hypocritical about it, and they'll say things like, oh, I'm better in person than I am on Zoom. Well, I can tell you almost everybody says that. which is true, but you got to get past the first test to get to the in-person. And
Exactly.
and there is no doubt for me moving forward that digital interviews, I think you are going to see the adoption of AI in some capacity for evaluating resumes, whether it's evaluating Zoom interviews, because not every club's working with someone like Ken, Tyler, any of the other search consultants that are in the industry. And so you're going to have members that are going to be leveraging these tools and technology to help them make a decision. So the straight answer is be prepared for digital interviews. And how easy is it that you can subscribe to Zoom for free and just practice here, pick up your phone, turn the camera on, and do it yourself? What are other things that you saw from a Zoom standpoint?
Well, just in general, you probably asked this question. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. That is not a time to go over your resume
Yeah.
because we've got that in front of us. So that's another question to really practice and have a short, concise answer to. Because we sat through a couple of them where these guys went through their resume. Well, we're looking at the resume. We don't need to hear that. So that's one. I think that starts off most every interview is tell us about yourself. So you got to come up with some things that aren't on paper.
All right. So you just asked Tyler Bloom on the spot. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Tyler. Here is an appropriate response for those that are listening. I'm not saying it's the best answer, but I love golf. I've been playing golf since I was 6 years old and never saw myself doing anything else. Very fortunate, blessed. Grew up in central Pennsylvania, have a very humble background, hardworking, blue collar work ethic. I have a family, wife, 2 kids, and I'm super excited to be here today because here's the things I've learned about your club. You've got an upcoming renovation and Donald Ross renovation, and I have experience in that area, and I'm very passionate about classic golf course architecture. You have an upcoming event, tournament hosted by the USGA. My goal and ambition in my entire career has been able to host an event, and I aligned my career steps up to host an event, right? So those are like very simple, low-hanging fruit things. Or by the way, take a look at the job profile and read between the lines. What are some of the things that they hit on, whether it's environmental stewardship, whether it's attention to detail. Well, you talked about it earlier about having somebody that loves the game of golf. I've got a 3.5 handicap, and I try to leverage my ability playing golf at an amateur level in high school in my career right now. Like, that's how you answer that opening question and tell us about yourself.
Yeah. And you get that. We want to take it to the next level.
Yeah.
We hear that one a lot, don't we?
Yeah. Yes, I do. I'm still trying to figure out what the heck does next level mean. And did they just watch like me a Nick Saban YouTube video that pumped them up to say that? So I can smell that out.
I think that means they're not quite happy with the conditions they've had and they want better. I think that's what and they want it every day.
I had a conversation recently with the committee around cultural fit, right? You probably hear this from committees. They've got to be a good cultural fit for us. Well, what does that mean to you? What do you think clubs are really trying to get when they say cultural fit? Because I mean, I can go to one club 10 miles down the street to one, the one I'm currently at and be like, well, they said cultural fit too. Well, what's the difference?
I describe it like this. I ask them, look at this like who you want to be married to, because you're making a decision here for 10 or 15 years. So you want a guy who's agronomically sound, but you also want somebody that you enjoy being around. You enjoy their company, that's comfortable to work with. I think that's kind of what they mean is they're looking for somebody that fits in with the GM, the golf professional that's there, that makes a great team and is good to work with. It's got some personality and it's just a pleasant person to be around. The days are long gone when you can stay hidden in the building, the barn, as we used to call it, stay away from people and just take care of the golf course. Those days are gone.
You probably see this in the Zoom. Here's something else. Like, and again, I think it's all based off the context. If there's a committee of people, or if it's one-to-one with you, a search consultant, or somebody else, I find that candidates just get in the routine of answering the question versus having a conversation, and they miss opportunities to really like sell themselves and ask pointed questions back to the committee. Now, I think it's important that you answer the questions concisely to what the committee's looking for. I totally believe in that, but you got to find a way to get them to warm up to you and build rapport in that conversation versus just rapid fire Q&A session, because I can tell you everybody else is having that same kind of approach. But if you can find a way to ask some questions and get them talking about the club, it's going to create opportunities for you to say, oh yeah, based on what you just said, here's something else about my background that you may not have known. You see that?
Yeah. I think picking up and establishing eye contact and answering some of their questions with a question sometimes, because you don't want any dead space, and nor do you want to, like you say, conversation, and not just them asking you questions all the time. You ask some questions back and get them interacting as well. I think that's important, that it's a two-way communication.
You mentioned this to me off air, and I think this is important for people to hear. And again, we're kind of zeroed in on Zoom interviews, is your presentation of yourself, your lighting, your background. Those are all opportunities to really level up yourself, making sure you have at bare minimum a sport coat and a button down shirt. I would suggest a tie unless told otherwise. Always dress up if you can. But just making sure the small little details, there's no background noise, kids aren't playing in the background. I think those are really small little cues that people pick up on and make judgments and perspectives around attention to detail. You see that? Did you see that too?
Oh, yeah. And you want to make sure that whatever they see is good. Sometimes, one of them was in a dark office. Well, it was really, the candidate didn't look comfortable, and they were a long way away from the camera. Practice the Zoom is really, really important. I can't stress that enough, because you're correct. 90% of the jobs today start out as Zoom interviews. Because when you get 100 resumes like we did, how do you go through them? You can't interview that many people in person. So that was the tool we used to separate the first group. If you can't get past Zoom interview, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So that's become the resume is important, because as you grade people on their experience versus what your criteria are, that gets you into the Zoom interview. Then the Zoom interview is going to get you the in-person interview. So the Zoom interview is key to getting the interview, because if you don't get the interview, you can't get the job.
We go back and forth internally on process a little bit about trying to make sure that there's a personable approach to these things as much as we can, right? As much as we can. And I think that there are opportunities where some of what is happening in the AI world may take some of that personalization off. So I think for candidates as well, like if you're not comfortable with the Zoom, find different ways to connect with that committee post that Zoom, whether it's a personal email, whether it's a phone outreach, a thank you card, like those things still go a long way, and people pay attention to that stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I appreciate you coming on today. Very wide-ranging discussion, and I look forward to seeing you in Orlando in a couple of weeks.
Hopefully. Yeah, it'll be here quick. I'll be there. I'll be between the Blade Runner booth and Buy-Side booth and with the Zoysia stuff. So come by and see me.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Leadership on the Links. For more leadership insights and industry expertise, connect with us at bloomgolfpartners.com or follow us on social media sites LinkedIn and Instagram. If you enjoyed this episode of Leadership on the Links, we'd be thrilled if you'd leave a review or share it with someone who you know would get some value. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to stay updated. Thanks for joining us today.